Little origami cranes. It's hard to imagine such intense meaning being carried by tiny folded up pieces of paper. When President Obama visited Hiroshima in 2016, he folded one and he presented it to the unbelievably welcoming folks there. That little origami crane, humbly offered by the leader of the free world, carried 7 decades of pain and loss and shame and guilt in the surprisingly resilient folds of its tiny paper wings. Its angled silhouette served as a delicate reminder of the fragility of existence, its innocent shape, a playful memento of the indestructible hope of youth. During his visit, the first by a sitting US president, Obama said this: 71 years ago, on a bright, cloudless morning, death fell from the sky and the world changed. Death fell from the sky, the world changed. There's this monument to the children there on that hallowed ground, a memorial of the more than 2,000 kids who were vaporized instantly in a fire as hot as the sun that day. The monument features a statue of a girl around 10 or 12 years old named Sadako Sasaki. She's holding a paper crane. In the months before she died from the effects of the bomb, Sadako had hoped to fold 1,000 paper cranes as the radiation ate away at her body in the hospital. Japanese tradition holds that by completing that peaceful task, folding 1,000 origami cranes, that would have made her one dying wish come true. Sadako's wish was simple: no more nuclear weapons. Recently, our family, me, my wife, and our 2 teenage daughters, had the privilege of visiting this deeply stricken but gorgeously peace-filled town. As Americans visiting Hiroshima, the site where our history books taught us that a great victory was sealed with the atomic bomb, well, that was complicated. That's the word I kept using to honestly assess our presence there. That's the only word I could find to use after we returned to the United States to tell other Americans what it was like to visit Hiroshima. Our touristy looking foursome walked through the park that sits directly beneath the explosion's epicenter, where approximately 100,000 total people were killed instantly. Tens of thousands more died terrible, painful deaths from the radiation in the months and years after. There, where the power of science was unleashed, there where mothers and daughters and fathers and sons lost each other in a flash, there where a worldwide nightmare was created and a war was ended, there where a museum and a park dedicated to peace now welcomes folks from all over the world each and every day. Was that bomb pure evil? Or was it some calculated and justified retributive response combined with a bold strategy that would end up saving lives in the long run? Was it God's work or something far more sinister? As a kid, and as a proud American whose grandfather fought on the warships in the United States Navy's Pacific Theater of World War II, I grew up with a certain sense of that August 6, 1945 moment. I grew up knowing about the horrors of Pearl Harbor. I grew up learning about our greatest generation sacrificing everything for us. I grew up knowing I came from a long line of good guys who wore the stars and stripes. That moment was the culmination of our scientific, political, and military prowess that made us, as a nation, a global superhero. It ended the Great War. It gave us the edge over the tyrants. It was a dark day, but it had to be done. That's what I was taught. That's the story that is in the air and in the water of American life. Today, as an adult living in a global world, as a more mature student of global political history, and as a parent who wants to cultivate a sense of unconditional grace and love in the hearts of my kids, as a person of faith who seeks to emulate the great spiritual teachers of history, and now as a human being who has visited Hiroshima, Japan, I have a very different sense of that day, that moment, that bomb. I want to pause to reflect on some ancient wisdom for a moment. In Matthew's Gospel, the 5th chapter, Jesus teaches one of his core lessons. He says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may Be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. I'd also like to take a moment to consider this beautiful old saying from the Japanese Zen Buddhist tradition. In the scenery of spring, there is neither better nor worse. The flowering branches grow naturally, some long, some short. The sun rises, the rain falls, the flowers bloom, and the trees grow. Whether you perceive yourself to be the good guy or not, the world is beyond that short-sighted story. We are but a part of this beautiful and wondrous universe. We are the sun, the rain, the flowers, and the trees. Destruction of one is destruction of all. Destruction of one is destruction of God. This piece is not meant to spark a debate about nuclear policy or the ethics of war. Instead, I think I just want to reflect on the indescribable grace and warmth of the Japanese people when we visited Hiroshima. They are the sun and the rain. They are the flowering branches. They are the origami crane. They are hope and peace. The connection and sense of welcome that we felt in that town is impossible to imagine. Every human on the planet should visit that place to get to know the lives that were lost and the lives that very much go on in that beautiful seaside town. After dinner one night in Hiroshima, my family met the woman who owned the restaurant where we had eaten, like it was just a local restaurant. She told a story about a family friend of hers whose child's tricycle is on display in the museum in town. The toy tricycle had been buried in a backyard alongside the charred remains of a man's 6-year-old son who died that day. It was later exhumed as the child was laid to rest in a proper grave, and the tricycle was donated to the museum. This woman, who had served us curry and ramen, knew real people and their real family members whose stories were on display for tourists like us to try to understand. But until we heard it from her, I'm not sure we really understood the ongoing pain and loss in that town. The sun kept rising there, the rain kept falling, the flowering branches continued to grow. During our time there, we were cheerfully welcomed and hosted with love. We were not treated as old enemies, but instead gently treated as innocent and ignorant visitors who just needed to see the people and the places up close to maybe understand a bit more. And maybe, with our understanding, it might never happen again. The paper origami cranes are everywhere in that town. I got this one there in Hiroshima. They become an icon of that town, not a symbol of vengeance or vitriol, not a symbol of strength or power, not a symbol calling for people to rise up and fight. A fragile piece of paper folded by a child with the hope that, as Sadako Sasaki shared as she tried to keep folding in her frail state, she wrote, "I will write peace on your wings and you will fly all over the world." The myths we tell about ourselves as good guys and about others as bad guys are helpful in moments of fear and despair, but over time, when the spring of a new era arises, we're all just fragile paper cranes flying beneath the same sun and being cleansed of our past by the same rains. Today, I pray, God, give us your perspective. Help us see each other from your view. Take us out of our small-minded conflicts and give us the perspective and wisdom of the ages. Save us from ourselves. Amen. Between is about you. Take this message into your life this week and fill the space between you and every person you encounter with your sacred light. My favorite church is the space between people. Now go with God's love and create the church between.